Hey guys, tonight we slip into the gritty, shadowed streets of Europe in 1347, where survival feels like a cosmic gamble. Picture this. You're trudging through a muddy alley, the air thick with the stench of rotting scraps and unwashed bodies. Torches flicker, casting eerie shapes on crumbling walls, and somewhere nearby a dog howls like it knows something you don't. The Black Death is slithering closer, a silent predator no one's ready for. You probably won't survive this, not with invisible killers lurking in every breath and bite. But let's try to outwit fate together, shall we? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a bustling market square, but something's off. The year is 1347, and whispers of a strange sickness are starting to ripple through the crowd. Merchants hawk wilted cabbages, their voices hoarse, while a gaunt woman clutches her shawl, coughing into the folds. You don't know it yet, but the Black Death is already here, carried on ships from distant ports, its tendrils curling into every corner of Europe. Historians peg this as the start of a pandemic that could wipe out half the continent's population, some 50 million souls, within a few years. That's the mainstream fact. The plague's body count is staggering, unmatched in its era. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some folks back then thought cats were bad luck, even devil's minions, so they slaughtered them. Big mistake. Cats kept rat populations in check, and rats, well, they're about to become plague-carrying superstars. Fewer cats, more rats, more death. Nice going, medieval superstition squad. Historians still argue whether the plague was only bubonic, spread by fleas, or if pneumonic and septicemic forms tag-teamed the chaos. The debate rages, but you don't care about terms right now. You're too busy dodging a cart of turnips that nearly clips your toes. The market hums with nervous energy. You weave past a juggler tossing apples, bet he's not eating those later, and notice the crowd's on edge. A man mutters about God's wrath while tying a scrap of cloth over his face. Good luck with that, buddy. It's about as useful as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. Your stomach growls, but the bread stall's empty, and the baker's got a feverish glaze in his eyes. You're not just fighting a disease, you're battling ignorance, fear, and a world that's got no clue what's coming. Every step feels like a roll of the dice, and the odds aren't in your favor. Still, you keep moving, because standing still feels like surrendering. The plague's shadow is long, and it's only just begun to stretch over you. You're slogging through a narrow street now, the kind where your shoulders brush against slimy stone walls on both sides. The air's a sour cocktail of human waste, damp straw, and something you'd rather not name. It's 1347, and Europe's towns are basically petri dishes for disaster. You step over a puddle that's more sewage than water, your boots squelching in the muck. This isn't just a bad day. This is medieval sanitation, or the lack of it, turning every corner into a breeding ground for the Black Death. The mainstream fact? Most towns had no sewers. Waste was tossed into streets or nearby rivers, making clean water a fairy tale. Disease loves this kind of filth, and the plague's having a field day. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some folks thought bathing was dangerous, like it opened your pores to bad air. So they'd go months without a scrub, wearing their sweat like a badge of honor. Meanwhile, you're wishing for a hot shower and some soap, lavender maybe, to mask the stench. Historians still argue whether this miasma theory, blaming foul air for disease, delayed any real progress against the plague. No one's got a microscope yet, so they're all just guessing. You pass a butcher's stall, where flies swarm over a slab of questionable meat. A stray dog sniffs at a pile of entrails, and you wonder if it's smarter than the guy hacking at the carcass with a crusty knife. The street's alive with shouts, vendors, kids, a drunk singing off-key about lost love. But there's a tension, like everyone's waiting for the other shoe to drop. You hear a woman hiss, "The sickness took another in York," and the crowd shifts uneasily. News travels slow, but fears faster than a galloping horse. Your nose wrinkles as you dodge a chamber pot's contents, dumped from a window above. Nice aim, lady. The joke's on you, though. Every splash is a plague party invitation. Houses lean over the street, their upper stories nearly touching, blocking out the sun. It's claustrophobic, and the lack of light makes the grime feel alive, like it's watching you. You're not paranoid, but you're starting to get why people pray 5 times a day. If God's not on your side, who is? The street ends at a sluggish river, where a washerwoman beats linen against a rock. The water's brown, and you're pretty sure that's not mud. She's singing softly, but her hands tremble. You want to tell her to run, to get out of this festering town. But where would she go? Every place is a mirror of this one, dirty, crowded, and ripe for death. You pull your cloak tighter, as if that'll shield you from the invisible enemy. It won't, but it's all you've got. The filth is everywhere, and you're right in the middle of it, trying to keep your wits sharper than the dagger at your belt. You're weaving through a crowded alley now, the kind where every step risks a collision with a peddler or a pickpocket. The ground's a slippery mess of mud, and who knows what, and something small and furry darts past your ankle. Rats. They're everywhere in 1347 Europe, skittering through shadows, gnawing on scraps, and, though you don't know it yet, carrying the Black Death's real MVPs, fleas. These tiny bloodsuckers are the plague's delivery system, hitching rides on rats and jumping to humans with a bite that's barely a pinch but deadly as a crossbow bolt. The mainstream fact? Yersinia pestis, the bacterium behind the plague, thrives in fleas' guts, spreading through bites and turning rats into unwitting grim reapers. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some towns paid rat catchers to clear the streets, but these guys often doubled as con artists, selling plague-proof charms that were about as useful as a wooden shield in a firestorm. Talk about a side hustle. Historians still argue whether the plague's spread was mostly flea-driven or if human-to-human transmission, like coughing, played a bigger role in tight quarters. The jury's out, but you're not waiting for answers. You pause as a rat scurries across a pile of rotting cabbage, its beady eyes glinting in the torchlight. Gross, but kind of bold, you think. Then you notice the fleas, little black specks hopping on its fur. Your skin crawls and you swat at your cloak, half convinced something's already on you. A kid nearby chucks a stone at the rat, missing by a mile. "Plague bringers," he yells, and his mom yanks him away, muttering prayers. You'd laugh if it weren't so grim. The kid's not wrong, but he's got no clue how deep this goes. The alley opens to a wider street, where a cart rattles by, piled with moldy hay. Another rat darts from under it, and you jump back, heart thumping. Relax, you tell yourself. It's just a rat. But the sheer number of them, under barrels, in gutters, along walls, feels like an invasion. You pass a baker's stall, where a loaf sits suspiciously nibbled. Bet it wasn't a customer. The baker's too busy haggling to notice, but you're not eating here. No way. A woman in a tattered shawl brushes past, scratching her arm. You freeze. Was that a flea bite? Your mind's playing tricks, but every itch feels like a death sentence now. The street's buzzing, merchants shouting, a blacksmith hammering, some guy preaching about the end of days. You catch his eye, and he points at you, yelling, "Repent, or the rats'll feast!" Okay, buddy, take it down a notch. But he's not entirely off. The rats are winning, and you're just trying to stay one step ahead of their tiny, flea-ridden army. Your dagger's useless against this enemy, and that's the worst part. You can't fight what you can't see. You're standing outside a dim, smoky building that passes for a healer's shop, its sagging door barely hanging on. The air's thick with the tang of herbs and something sharper, like vinegar gone bad. It's 1347, and Europe's doctors are more like hopeful gamblers than scientists, tossing out cures that range from useless to outright wacky. You push inside, desperate for answers about the sickness creeping through town. The physician is a sweaty man in a stained robe, muttering over a bowl of what looks like mud mixed with feathers. You're hoping for a miracle, but deep down, you know prayers might be your only shot. The mainstream fact? Medieval medicine leaned on ancient texts and astrology with no germ theory to guide it. Doctors didn't even know bacteria existed. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some healers prescribed wearing a live chicken around your neck to draw out the plague. Spoiler, the chicken didn't help, but it probably wasn't thrilled either. Historians still argue whether these bizarre treatments did more harm than good, distracting from basic care like rest or clean water. No one's got solid data, and you're not holding your breath for clarity. The healer looks up, his eyes bleary, and thrusts a vial of murky liquid at you. "Drink this," he grumbles. "Toad ashes and wine banishes evil humors." You stare at the vial, wondering if it's worth the risk. Pass. You've seen enough sick folks to know this guy's more showman than savior. A woman in the corner coughs violently, her face pale as chalk, and the healer waves a bundle of burning sage like it's a magic wand. Nice try, but the room still feels like death's waiting room. You step back, nearly tripping over a stack of dusty books, probably Galen or Hippocrates, misquoted to justify this nonsense. The walls are lined with jars of leeches, dried roots, and something that might be a pickled snake. You're no expert, but this feels like a scam. A kid peeks in, shouting, "My ma's worse!" The healer sighs, handing him a charm etched with stars. "Tie this to her wrist," he says. The kid bolts, and you hope he's got better luck than you're feeling. Outside, the streets know better. Someone's chanting psalms, and a cart creaks past, loaded with feverish bodies. You remember that coughing woman in the market from a few days ago? Remember her shawl? She's probably gone now, and no doctor could have saved her. You pull your cloak tighter, dodging a guy selling holy water from a bucket. Bet it's straight from the river, same one they dump waste in. The joke's on anyone who buys it, but you're not laughing. Every cure's a gamble, and the house always wins. You keep moving, praying your own strength holds out, because these so-called doctors are just tossing dice with your life. You're trudging toward a stone church, its bell tolling low and mournful, like it's already given up. The year is 1347, and Europe's clinging to faith as the Black Death tightens its grip. You push through a crowd of hollow-eyed worshippers, their hands clasped in prayer, their whispers thick with desperation. Inside, the air's heavy with incense and fear, candles flickering like they're scared to stay lit. You're here for answers, for some sign that God's still watching, but the packed pews and trembling priests suggest even the devout are wavering. The mainstream fact? The church was Europe's backbone, but the plague scale, millions dying in months, shook its authority, leaving clergy and laity alike questioning divine will. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some priests sold indulgences to forgive sins, claiming they'd protect against plague. Spoiler, no refund when the buyer dropped dead. Historians still argue whether the church's response strengthened faith or sowed seeds of skepticism that later fueled the Reformation. No clear winner, but you're not here for debates. You just want hope. You squeeze onto a bench, your knees brushing a woman muttering Latin under her breath. Her rosary beads click like tiny bones. The priest at the altar, draped in heavy robes, looks as pale as the corpses piling up outside. He's preaching about repentance, but his voice cracks when he mentions God's judgment. You glance around, old men, young mothers, even a kid clutching a wooden cross, all staring at the crucifix like it might speak. A guy behind you coughs, and half the congregation flinches. Great. Now you're wondering if prayer comes with a side of plague. The stained glass windows glow faintly, casting red and blue patches on the floor. Pretty, but they don't block the chill seeping through the walls. You remember that preacher in the market, remember his repent or rats rant? He'd fit right in here, shouting about doom. A woman nearby sobs, and someone hisses, "Quiet, you'll anger him." Harsh, but fears got everyone on edge. You're half tempted to join the sobbing, might feel better than this knot in your chest. Outside you hear a commotion, another funeral procession probably. The church doors creak open, and a man stumbles in, his face feverish, begging for a blessing. The priest hesitates, then gestures him to a corner. Nobody wants him closer. You pull your scarf over your nose, not that it helps. The sermon drones on, but the words feel hollow, like a lullaby for a nightmare. You want to believe, you really do, but the bodies stacking up make faith feel like a leaky boat in a storm. You slip out, dodging a beggar who's definitely not getting alms today. Sorry, mate, survival's selfish. The church bells keep ringing, but they sound more like a warning than salvation. You're hurrying along a dusty road, the clatter of carts and shouts of traders filling the air. It's 1347, and Europe's trade routes, usually pulsing with life, are becoming highways for the Black Death. You dodge a merchant's donkey, its saddlebags stuffed with silks from God knows where, and catch a whiff of stale sweat and spices. These paths, linking ports to inland towns, are how goods flow, but now they're ferrying something deadlier. Plague-ridden fleas and infected travelers. You're just trying to get to the next village, but every step feels like you're racing death itself. The mainstream fact? The Black Death spread rapidly along trade networks, with ports like Messina and Genoa hit first, sparking a chain reaction across Europe by 1348. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some merchants smeared garlic on their coins, thinking it'd ward off disease. Spoiler, it just made their hands stink while the plague laughed. Historians still argue whether trade routes alone drove the pandemic's speed, or if local conditions like overcrowding amplified the chaos. You're not pondering that now. You're too busy eyeing the guy ahead, coughing into his sleeve. The road's a mess, churned to mud by hooves and wheels. A trader hawks wool, his voice hoarse, while another unloads barrels of wine, oblivious to the fleas probably hitching a ride. You remember those rats in the alley? Remember their beady eyes? They're likely stowing away in these carts, spreading their tiny assassins. A woman barters for cloth, her kid tugging at her skirt, and you wonder if they'll make it through the week. Harsh thought, but survival's making you cold. A rider gallops past, shouting about death in Florence. News travels fast when it's bad. You pull your cloak tighter, as if that'll block the invisible threat. A cart driver sneezes, and you veer wide. Sorry, mate, no offense. The road stretches toward a port town, its skyline smudged with smoke. Ships from Asia docked there weeks ago, and you're starting to connect the dots. That toad ash potion from the healer, remember that scam? Feels like a lifetime ago, but it's only been days. You're learning fast. Trust no one. Touch nothing. A beggar limps by, offering a blessed amulet for a coin. You snort. Nice try. But you're not that gullible. The joke's on him. He's probably got less time than you. Still, the road's alive with movement, and every traveler's a potential carrier. You keep moving, your boots heavy with mud, your heart heavier with dread. The trade routes are Europe's veins, but they're pumping poison now, and you're right in the bloodstream, hoping to slip through before it's too late. You're hunched in a cramped, smoky hovel, the straw beneath your feet damp and reeking of mildew. It's 1347, and Europe's towns are stuffed with homes like this, tight, airless, and perfect for the Black Death to throw a party. You share this space with a family of 6, all squeezed around a single hearth, their breaths mingling in the dim glow. The walls are wattle and daub, patched with mud, and the roof leaks when it rains, which is often. Every cough, every brush of a shoulder, feels like a roll of the dice, and the plague's got the hot hand. The mainstream fact? Overcrowded living conditions, with families packed into tiny spaces, turned homes into plague incubators, spreading disease faster than gossip. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some folks slept with onions under their pillows, thinking the smell would purify the air. Spoiler, it just made their dreams stinkier. Historians still argue whether poor ventilation in these hovels was a bigger killer than the fleas outside. You're not sure, but the stuffy air's making your head spin. You shift on a creaky bench, trying not to bump the woman next to you who's stirring a pot of thin gruel. Her kid's hacking into a rag, and you inch away, heart pounding. The room's barely 10 feet across, with one window shuttered tight. Fresh air's a luxury no one trusts. You remember those trade routes. Remember the coughing merchant. This family's dad just got back from one, hauling grain. Now you're wondering if he brought more than barley. A mouse skitters across the floor, and the oldest son swats at it with a stick, missing wildly. Great, more rodents. The fleas from that alley, remember those hopping specks, are probably here too, invisible and unstoppable. The fire crackles, but it's not enough to chase the chill or the dread. You glance at the door, half tempted to bolt, but outside's no safer. A neighbor's voice drifts through the wall, wailing about a dead sister. The sound's too close, like grief's seeping through the cracks. The mom mutters a prayer, her hands trembling as she ladles gruel. You take a bowl, more out of politeness than hunger, and notice her nails are black with dirt. Hygiene's a myth here, and you're itching to scrub your hands, maybe your whole body. A kid sneezes, and you flinch so hard you spill your food. Smooth move, you think, but no one laughs. Humor's scarce when death's knocking. The dad's watching you, suspicious, like you're the one bringing bad luck. Buddy, if only you knew, this whole setup's a plague trap. You eat a spoonful of gruel, tasteless as regret, and pray you make it through the night. This hovel's a cage, and you're locked in with the enemy. You're weaving through a nearly deserted market, the stalls half empty, and the air sharp with the bite of autumn. It's 1347, and Europe's food supply is crumbling as the Black Death claws through towns. You clutch a worn sack, hoping to scrounge something edible, but the vendors' faces are grim, their baskets sparse. A loaf of bread costs more than a day's wages, and the potatoes look like they've seen better days, probably buried under a sick farmer's barn. Famine's tightening its grip, starving bodies already weakened by plague, and your stomach's growling louder than a stray dog. The mainstream fact? The plague disrupted agriculture, with fields left unharvested and workers dying, causing food shortages that hit urban areas hardest by 1348. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some folks ate famine bread made from ground bark or acorns, which was about as nutritious as chewing a tree. Spoiler, it didn't fill you up, but it sure upset your gut. Historians still argue whether famine or plague was the bigger killer in these years, as starvation made surviving disease nearly impossible. You're not picking sides, you just want something to eat. You approach a stall where a gaunt woman haggles over a handful of wilted turnips. She's offering a copper ring, but the vendor shakes his head. Coin or nothing, he snaps. You feel her desperation. Your own purse is light as a feather. A kid nearby munches on a crust, and you're half tempted to barter for it. Relax. You're not that far gone. Yet. You remember that crowded hovel? Remember the gruel? Food was scarce there too, and this market's no better. A cart rumbles past, carrying sacks of grain guarded by a guy with a club. Bet he's not sharing. You spot a rotten apple in the dirt and hesitate. Dignity or dinner? You keep walking. A vendor shouts about fresh fish, but the smell says they've been dead longer than some plague victims. You'd laugh if your stomach wasn't staging a revolt. The market's edge leads to fields, but they're eerily quiet. No workers, just patches of unharvested wheat swaying in the wind. The plague's killing farmers faster than crops can grow. A woman clutches a rosary, muttering about God's punishment. You want to tell her hunger doesn't care about prayers, but you hold your tongue. Another stall has a single chicken, scrawny and overpriced. The vendor eyes you like you're a thief. Buddy, if I could afford that bird, I'd be feasting, not glaring. You settle for a bruised onion, trading your last decent button. It's not much, but it's something. The market's thinning out, and so's your hope. Every empty stall feels like a warning. Starvation's as deadly as the fleas, and you're dodging both with every step. You're slipping through a shadowed street, the flicker of torches barely cutting through the evening gloom. It's 1347, and Europe's unraveling under the Black Death's weight, with superstitions running wilder than a spooked horse. You overhear a cluster of townsfolk muttering about the plague's cause. Some blame Jews poisoning wells, others point to misaligned stars or God's wrath. These aren't just idle theories. They're sparking mob violence and desperate rituals, as people cling to anything that explains the chaos. You keep your head down, hoping no one pegs you as an outsider to scapegoat. The mainstream fact? Scapegoating led to horrific pogroms, with Jewish communities across Europe massacred based on baseless rumors, especially in 1348 to 49. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some folks wore amulets shaped like toads, believing they'd absorb the plague's evil vapors. Spoiler, the toads didn't help, but they were probably the trendiest accessory of the year. Historians still argue whether these superstitions delayed practical responses, like quarantine, or just gave people a false sense of control. You're not sure, but you're dodging the mob's torchlight either way. A man in a tattered cloak shouts, "The stars foretold this," waving a crude astrological chart. You roll your eyes. Buddy, the stars aren't coughing up fleas. But the crowd's eating it up, nodding like he's cracked the code. You remember that onion from the market, remember that sad trade. It's still in your sack, and you're half tempted to chuck it at him. A woman nearby whispers about a cursed baker who hexed his bread. Great, now you're wondering if your last meal was cursed too. Relax, it's just moldy, not magical. The street narrows, and you spot a group painting red crosses on a door, marking it as a plague house. A kid throws a stone at the window, and the mob cheers. You slip past, heart racing, as their chants grow louder. Something about cleansing the town. You've heard of Jews being burned in Strasbourg. The thought makes your stomach twist. A beggar tugs your sleeve, offering a star-blessed pebble for protection. You snort. Nice hustle, but you're not buying. The joke's on him. He's in as much danger as anyone. Torches flare at the street's end, where a crowd's gathering around a bonfire. They're burning clothes, maybe books, shouting about purging sin. The smoke stings your eyes, and you pull your scarf up, not just for the smell, but to blend in. Every wild theory fuels this madness, and you're just trying to stay invisible. The stars overhead are bright, indifferent, and definitely not to blame. You keep moving, praying the mob's too busy to notice one more stranger in the dark. You're trapped in a walled-off town, the heavy gates bolted shut behind you. It's 1347, and Europe's experimenting with quarantine to slow the Black Death. But it feels more like a prison than protection. You stand in a muddy square, surrounded by timber houses leaning like tired drunks. The air's thick with smoke and the sour tang of fear. Nobody's allowed in or out, and the townsfolk are pacing like caged dogs. Guards in patched armor patrol the walls, their eyes darting to anyone who coughs. You're stuck here, hoping isolation keeps the plague at bay, but the tension's sparking rebellion. The mainstream fact? Early quarantines, like Venice's 40-day ship isolation, started in 1347 to 48, but enforcing them in chaotic towns often backfired, breeding resentment. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some towns rang bells non-stop, thinking the noise would scare off plague spirits. Spoiler, it just gave everyone a headache. Historians still argue whether quarantines slowed the plague significantly or just delayed the inevitable while stirring unrest. You're not sure, but the locked gates aren't exactly calming your nerves. You shuffle past a baker's stall, now shuttered, its owner glaring from a window. Food's rationed, and your onion from that market, remember that button trade, is long gone. A woman hisses at a guard, "Let us out!" But he shoves her back with his spear's butt. Ouch, bad move. Her neighbors start shouting, and a rock sails past. You duck behind a barrel, not keen on getting caught in a riot. The square's a powder keg. One sick person could set it off. A kid nearby scratches his arm and you freeze. Flea bite or just dirt? Relax, you're jumping at shadows. The church bell clangs, not for spirits but to signal curfew. You remember those torchlit mobs, remember their purge chants? That energy's here too, just bottled up. A man in a hooded cloak slips through the crowd, whispering about a secret gate. You're tempted, but his shifty eyes scream trouble. No thanks, you're not that desperate. Yet. A guard barks, "Back to your homes," and you move, dodging a woman tossing out a bucket of slop. Nice aim, lady, but you're not in the mood for a bath. Houses are marked with chalk. Circles for healthy, crosses for sick. Your hovel's got a circle, but for how long? You hear a muffled sob from a cross-marked door and hurry past. The quarantine's meant to save you, but it's squeezing hope dry. You slip inside, the air stale, and bolt the door. Outside, voices rise. Someone's accusing a neighbor of bringing the curse. Great, another witch hunt. You huddle by a dying fire, praying the walls hold and the plague stays out. Freedom's a memory, and survival's a coin toss. You're threading through a ghostly town square, the air heavy with the stench of decay and smoke. It's 1347, and the Black Death is piling bodies faster than anyone can bury them. You pass a cart groaning under a heap of shrouded figures, the driver's face wrapped in a rag like he's hiding from death itself. Cemeteries are overflowing, and gravediggers, overworked and underpaid, are barely keeping up. You sidestep a muddy ditch, half expecting it to be a shallow grave. Every corner reeks of loss, and you're just trying to avoid joining the stack. The mainstream fact? The plague's death toll overwhelmed burial systems, with mass graves becoming common by 1348, some holding hundreds in a single pit. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some towns hired corpse counters, kids as young as 10, to tally the dead for a crust of bread. Spoiler, they weren't exactly precise, but who could blame them? Historians still argue whether the sheer volume of deaths fueled social collapse or forced communities to adapt faster. You're not pondering that. You're too busy dodging the cart's wobbly wheel. The driver curses as a body slips, thudding into the mud. You flinch, your stomach churning. A woman nearby wails, clutching a tattered shawl. Maybe it's her kin. You want to look away, but the scene's everywhere. A churchyard looms ahead, its soil churned like a fresh field. No headstones, just lumps of dirt. You remember that quarantine square? Remember the chalk marks? This is where the crosses end up. A gravedigger, face gaunt as a skull, leans on his shovel, muttering about no more room. You don't ask where the next batch goes. A crow perches on a fence, eyeing you like you're next. Creepy, but you're not superstitious, much. You pull your cloak tighter, the chill sinking into your bones. A kid darts past, clutching a coin, probably a corpse counter on his rounds. 20 today, he shouts to no one. Kid, keep it down. You're not helping the mood. The street narrows, and you pass a house with boards nailed over the door. Plague inside, no doubt. The silence from within is louder than any scream. You hear a bell, not the church's, but a death cart rolling through. Another load, another ditch. A man in a doorway mutters about God's mercy, but his eyes are empty. You'd joke about needing a bigger graveyard, but humor's dead too. The bodies keep coming, and the living are stretched thin. You keep moving, your boots heavy with mud and dread, praying you don't end up under the next shovelful. The graves are full, but the plague's still hungry. You're trudging down a rutted street, the wind carrying whispers of panic and the faint clink of coins changing hands. It's 1347, and the Black Death doesn't care if you're a noble in silk or a peasant in rags. It's mowing down everyone with equal gusto. You pass a grand house with shuttered windows, its lord likely sweating out a fever, then a hovel where a shoemaker's family mourns their youngest. The plague's leveling society, turning hierarchies into a grim lottery, where no title or coin guarantees survival. The mainstream fact? The Black Death's indiscriminate slaughter, killing up to 50% of Europe's population by 1351, reshaped class structures as labor shortages gave survivors leverage. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some nobles tried plague-proofing their manors by sealing themselves in with barrels of wine and minstrels. Spoiler, the plague crashed the party anyway. Historians still argue whether the plague's social upheaval sparked long-term equality or just temporary chaos before old power structures snapped back. You're not debating, you're just trying to avoid the next coughing stranger. A merchant in fine wool stumbles past, his face ashen, muttering about bad air. You give him a wide berth, but not before noticing the black sores on his neck. So much for wealth saving you. You remember that overflowing graveyard? Remember the gaunt digger? It's swallowing lords and laborers alike. A beggar limps by, grinning like he's won something. Even the rich die, he cackles. You'd laugh if it weren't so eerie. Guy's got a point, though. The street opens to a market, quieter than it should be. A noblewoman, her velvet gown muddy, barters a gold ring for a sack of barley. The vendor, a scruffy farmer, shrugs like he's doing her a favor. Times are changing fast. You spot a knight, armor dented, hauling water like a servant. Bet he didn't sign up for this. You clutch your sack, empty since that onion trade, remember that button, and feel oddly equal to these highborns. Nobody's untouchable now. A kid runs past, shouting about a duke's death in the next town. News like that used to hush crowds. Now it's just another Tuesday. You dodge a cart piled with linens, probably stripped from a noble's bed. The driver's humming, unbothered. Plagues made scavengers bold. You joke about everyone being equal in death, but the thought lands flat. The line between rich and poor's blurring, and you're walking it, hoping to stay on the living side a little longer. You're picking your way through a littered street, the air sharp with the tang of smoke and rot. It's 1347, and the Black Deaths left a trail of orphaned kids scavenging in Europe's crumbling towns. You spot a girl, maybe 10, her face smudged with dirt, rifling through a pile of rags near a shuttered tavern. She clutches a crust of bread like it's gold, her eyes darting for threats. Families are vanishing, and kids like her are fending for themselves, dodging plague and hunger with no one to lean on. You want to help, but your own survival's hanging by a thread. The mainstream fact? The plague orphaned countless children, with estimates suggesting up to 20% of urban kids lost both parents by 1349, forcing them into labor or begging. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some orphans formed tiny gangs, trading stolen apples or bones for soup at convents. Spoiler, they were more Oliver Twist than Robin Hood. Historians still argue whether these kids fueled crime waves or were just victims of a broken system. You're not sure, but the girl's wary glance says she's learned trust is a luxury. You step over a broken barrel, its splinters snagging your cloak. The street's a maze of abandoned carts and scattered belongings. A comb, a torn shoe, signs of lives cut short. You remember that noble's house? Remember the shuttered windows? Its kids might be out here too, no better off than this girl. Another child, a boy with a limp, scurries past, clutching a bent spoon. Found it, he mutters, like it's a treasure. You'd smile if it weren't so grim. Kids got more hustle than most adults. A woman's voice cuts through, haggling with a vendor for a bruised pear. She's got 3 kids trailing her, all skeletal, their eyes huge. You wonder how long they'll last. Your stomach twists, and you fish in your sack. Nothing left since that onion. Remember that trade? A man in a patched cloak offers the girl a coin for work, his grin too sharp. You step closer and he slinks off. Good riddance, creep. The girl doesn't thank you. She just bolts, bread tucked under her arm. The street ends at a church, its doors ajar, but no one's praying. A kid's scrawled a cross in the dirt. Maybe a plea, maybe a game. You hear a distant shout. Another orphan caught stealing, probably. You joke about kids running the town, but it's too close to true. These children are tougher than you, scrapping for every scrap, while you're just trying to outrun the same plague that stole their families. You keep moving, their hollow eyes burning into your back. You're trudging across a muddy field, the stalks of unharvested wheat swaying like ghosts in the chill wind. It's 1347, and Europe's farms are crumbling under the Black Death's weight. You pass a pen where skeletal cows slump, their ribs sharp against dull hides, and a barn with a caved-in roof. Fields lie fallow, crops rotting where they stand, because the farmers who worked them are dead or dying. You're scavenging for anything edible, but the plague's ripple effect, killing livestock and starving the land, is making survival a scavenger hunt with no prize. The mainstream fact: the plague slashed agricultural output, with up to 40% of farmland abandoned by 1349, as labor shortages left crops and animals to waste. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some farmers tried blessing their fields with holy water to save crops, thinking divine intervention could outsmart disease. Spoiler: the wheat didn't care. Historians still argue whether the agricultural collapse was more from human deaths or disrupted trade cutting off tools and seed. You're not debating. You're just hoping for a stray carrot. You kick at a clump of dirt, unearthing a shriveled turnip. Jackpot, sort of. You remember those orphaned kids, remember the girl's crust of bread? They'd fight you for this. A distant moo draws your eye to a cow, collapsed, flies buzzing over its matted fur. Plague doesn't just hit humans, livestock's dropping too, maybe from neglect or worse. You're no vet, but you're steering clear. The field stretches to a village, its chimneys smokeless. Nobody's tending these lands, and the silence feels heavier than the mud on your boots. A scarecrow leans crookedly, its sack face grinning like it knows something you don't. Creepy, but you're too hungry to care. You spot a patch of potatoes, half dug, probably abandoned mid-harvest. You kneel, clawing at the soil, but most are rotten, black and slimy. Your stomach growls, unimpressed. A man's voice shouts, "Thief!" And you freeze, but it's just a farmer chasing a kid stealing grain. Poor guy's guarding what's left like a dragon. You joke about hoarding spuds, but hunger's no laughing matter. The sky's gray, spitting drizzle that soaks your cloak. You remember that empty market? Remember the overpriced chicken? This is why fields like this can't feed anyone. A dead sheep lies in a ditch, its wool matted with mud. You move on, clutching your turnip like a lifeline. Every rotting crop and fallen animal screams the same truth. The plague's starving the land as much as the people. You keep walking, eyes scanning for anything to keep you going, because stopping feels like giving up. You're creeping along a darkened road, the moon casting jagged shadows through bare trees. It's 1347, and the Black Death's chaos has birthed a new predator: bandits. With towns crumbling and guards overwhelmed, roving thieves are thriving, preying on travelers like you. Your hand grips a stick, hardly a weapon, but it's all you've got. The air's sharp with frost, and every rustle in the bushes spikes your pulse. You're just trying to reach the next village, but the law's as dead as the bodies piling up, and these roads belong to the bold and the brutal. The mainstream fact? The plague's disruption weakened local authorities, letting banditry surge by 1348, with some regions reporting doubled robbery rates. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some bandits wore stolen priest robes to trick travelers into trusting them. Spoiler: their blessings came with a knife. Historians still argue whether bandits were desperate survivors or opportunists exploiting the collapse. You're not sure, but you're not stopping to chat with the shadowy figure lurking up ahead. You duck behind a broken cart, its wheel splintered like it was ambushed. You remember those rotting fields, remember the dead sheep? No wonder people are stealing. Hunger's a great motivator. A twig snaps, and you freeze, heart thumping. Two men slink past, their voices low, one clutching a sack that clinks. Stolen coins, maybe. You stay still, praying they don't spot you. One laughs, a harsh bark saying, "Took it off a dead merchant." Charming. You joke about their career change, but you're too busy not breathing. The road curves toward a bridge, its stones slick with moss. You hear hooves, another traveler, or worse. You crouch low, stick ready, as a lone rider passes, his cloak flapping. He's gone, but your nerves are frayed. You remember that grim graveyard. Remember the corpse counter? Bandits probably loot those too. A distant shout echoes. Someone's not as lucky as you. You move faster, the village's faint lights winking ahead, but safety's a mirage. Every shadow could hide a blade. A woman's silhouette appears, waving a lantern. "Safe passage," she calls. Your gut screams trap. Those fake priests come to mind. You veer into the trees, thorns snagging your cloak. Better scratched than stabbed. The road's a gauntlet, and you're no knight. You grip your stick tighter, eyes scanning the dark, knowing bandits are just another plague symptom, human, but no less deadly. You keep moving, one wary step at a time, because stopping's not an option. You're huddled in a dim tavern, its air thick with the stench of sour ale and unwashed bodies. It's 1347, and Europe's desperate for plague cures, but the remedies floating around are as deadly as the disease itself. You clutch a chipped mug, eyeing a shady apothecary peddling a vial of plague-banishing toad venom to a gullible farmer. The tavern's packed with folks chasing false hopes, powders, charms, anything to cheat death. You're tempted to try something, anything, but your gut's screaming to stick with water, even if it's murky. The mainstream fact? Medieval cures like bloodletting or toxic concoctions often weakened or killed patients, with no understanding of the plague's bacterial cause until centuries later. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some swore by drinking urine, yep, their own, to flush out the plague. Spoiler, it just made them gag. Historians still argue whether these treatments were purely placebo or actively worsened the death toll. You're not sure, but you're not sipping that farmer's homebrew remedy either. The apothecary, all greasy beard and shifty eyes, waves another vial. "Toad venom, straight from Venice," he boasts. You remember that useless healer? Remember the toad ashes? Same scam, different day. The farmer hands over a silver coin, and you wince. Poor guy's betting his life on swamp juice. A woman nearby rubs a holy stone on her arm, muttering prayers. You'd laugh, but her feverish glaze kills the humor. The tavern's a circus of bad ideas, and you're just trying not to buy a ticket. A man stumbles in, raving about rosewater baths, saving his cousin. Sure, buddy, and your cousin's probably coughing up blood by now. You shift on the creaky bench, dodging a drunk who's sloshing ale and shouting about unicorn horn powder. Unicorn what now? The joke's on him. Last you checked, unicorns aren't real, and neither's his cure. The barmaid, wiping mugs with a rag dirtier than the floor, rolls her eyes. Smartest person here, maybe. You glance at your mug, half empty and tasting like regret. The apothecary's eyeing you now, sensing a mark. You shake your head. Nice try, but you're not that desperate. Yet. You remember those bandit roads, remember the fake priest? This tavern's just as risky, with lies instead of knives. Every cure's a gamble, and the odds are worse than a rigged dice game. You slip out, the cold air a relief, praying your own strength holds out. False hopes are everywhere, but you're sticking to skepticism. It's the only thing keeping you alive. You're standing at the edge of a muddy town square, the air thick with the scent of burning straw and sweat. It's 1347, and Europe's gripped by the Black Death, driving some to extreme acts of penance. A procession of flagellants snakes through, their chants rising like a fevered hymn. These zealots, stripped to the waist, whip themselves with knotted cords, blood streaking their backs, believing pain will appease God and stop the plague. You watch, half mesmerized, half horrified, as townsfolk gape or join in, desperate for divine mercy. You're just trying to stay clear of their swinging lashes and the frenzy they're stirring. The mainstream fact? Flagellant movements surged in 1348 to 49, with groups of hundreds roaming Europe, their public displays both inspiring and terrifying communities. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some flagellants carried holy whips blessed by rogue priests, thinking extra sacred beatings worked better. Spoiler: God wasn't taking their calls. Historians still argue whether flagellants spread the plague by traveling or helped by venting communal fear. You're not sure, but you're keeping your distance. A flagellant with wild eyes locks onto you, shouting, "Join us, or perish!" Yeah, hard pass. You step back, nearly tripping over a discarded shoe. Their whips crack like thunder, and a woman in the crowd sobs, clutching a cross. You remember that tavern's fake cures. Remember the toad venom. This feels like another dead end, just bloodier. A kid tosses a pebble at the procession, then bolts as a flagellant glares. Bold move, kid, but you're not cheering. Things could turn ugly fast. The square's a mess. Trampled mud, scattered herbs, a broken cart. The flagellants pause, kneeling to pray, their groans mixing with the wind. A man offers them bread, but they shove it away, yelling about purity. Okay, starve for the cause then. You'd joke about their skincare routine needing work, but the blood's too grim. A priest watches from the church steps, his face torn, half approving, half scared. Even he's not sure if this is salvation or madness. You slip down a side street, their chants fading but still prickling your spine. You remember those scapegoating mobs. Remember the bonfire? This feels like the same desperation, just turned inward. A stray dog trots by, unbothered, and you envy its calm. The flagellant's blood won't stop the plague, but it's stirring something else. Fear, hope, chaos. You pull your cloak tighter, dodging a puddle that reflects the moon. Mercy's what you need, but you're not finding it here, not in this square or those whips. You keep moving, praying your own path stays less painful. You're wandering through a quiet street, the air heavy with the scent of damp wood and fading torch smoke. It's 1347, and Europe's artists are channeling the Black Death's terror into haunting works that scream despair. You pause by a church wall where a half-finished mural depicts skeletal figures dancing with kings and peasants, their hollow eyes seeming to follow you. These images, on walls, in manuscripts, are everywhere, capturing a world gripped by death's shadow. You're no art critic, but the raw fear in every brushstroke hits like a punch. You're just trying to keep moving, but these grim creations make it hard to look away. The mainstream fact? The plague inspired a surge in macabre art, like the Danse Macabre by 1348, reflecting society's obsession with mortality. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some painters used crushed beetle shells for red pigment, thinking it warded off evil while they worked. Spoiler, it just made their art pricey, not protective. Historians still argue whether this art was a coping mechanism or a grim acceptance of death's dominance. You're not sure, but the mural's giving you chills. You trace a finger along the wall, careful not to smudge the paint. The artist's gone, dead or fled, but his work feels alive, like it's whispering about your odds. You remember those flagellants, remember their bloody whips? This mural's their vibe, just less messy. A woman shuffles past, muttering about death's dance coming for her. You don't argue, she's not wrong. A kid nearby scratches a crude skull into the dirt, copying the mural. Kid's got talent, but his subject's a bummer. The street leads to a market, where a scribe's stall displays a manuscript page, grinning corpses pulling a bishop to his grave. Cheerful stuff. You'd buy it for the irony, but your coins are long gone. Remember that onion trade? A man haggles for a woodcut of a plague saint, swearing it'll save his wife. Good luck, pal. Art's not a cure. You'd joke about framing it for your hovel, but the thought of those skeletons watching you sleep is a hard no. A bell tolls, and you glance back at the mural. The painted dead seem to smirk, like they know something you don't. You remember that overflowing graveyard. Remember the mass pits. This art's just truth in color. Death's the only winner here. You pull your cloak tighter, the wind biting your neck, and move on. The images linger, burned into your mind, reminding you that beauty's no shield against the plague. You keep walking, hoping to outpace the shadows, painted or real. You're slumped against a crumbling wall in a deserted alley, the night air sharp with the bite of frost. It's 1347, and you're one of the lucky ones. You've survived a wave of the Black Death that took half your town. But luck feels like a curse. Your chest's tight with guilt, your mind replaying faces of those who didn't make it. The baker, the kid with the limp, the woman with the rosary. You're alive, but the weight of their absence is heavier than the plague itself. Europe's survivors are haunted, wrestling with why they were spared when so many weren't. The mainstream fact? The plague's psychological toll was immense, with survivors' guilt documented in chronicles from 1348 as people grappled with loss and dread of the next wave. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some survivors wore black ribbons, not for mourning, but to trick death into thinking they'd already been claimed. Spoiler, death wasn't fooled. Historians still argue whether survivors' guilt drove social change, like charity, or deepened despair and isolation. You're not sure, but the silence in this alley's loud enough to drown out any answers. You shift, your back scraping the rough stone. A stray cat slinks by, its eyes glinting like it's judging you. You remember that mural, remember the dancing skeletons? Its grim truth feels personal now. Death skipped you, but for how long? A cough echoes from a distant house, and you flinch, your heart racing. Relax, it's just the wind. Probably. You pull your cloak tighter, the fabric thinner than your nerves. The alley's littered with debris, a broken jug, a torn shawl, remnants of lives you might have known. You think of that tavern, remember the toad venom? The farmer who bought it, is he still breathing? You didn't warn him, and now that stings. A voice in your head whispers you should have done more, helped more, but what could you have done? You're no healer, no priest. A man shuffles past, his face hollow, muttering, "Why me?" You'd answer, but you're asking the same question. You'd joke about starting a survivors club, but the punchline's too bitter. The moon's high, casting a pale glow on the cobblestones. You stand, legs shaky, and start walking. Every step feels like defiance, but guilt's a shadow you can't outrun. You pass a boarded-up door, chalked with a cross, another family gone. You're still here, but it's not victory, just a pause. The plague's not done, and neither's the ache in your chest. You keep moving, because stopping means facing the ghosts, and you're not ready for that. You're weaving through a ghostly market square, the stalls bare, and the wind whistling through cracked shutters. It's 1347, and the Black Death has gutted Europe's economy, turning bustling trade hubs into hollow shells. You clutch an empty sack, hoping to barter for a scrap of cloth or a handful of barley, but the few vendors left are hoarding like dragons. Coins are scarce, and trust is scarcer. Nobody's buying, selling, or even haggling much anymore. The plague's frozen commerce, and you're caught in the chill, scraping by on wits and luck. The mainstream fact? The plague crippled trade by 1348, with markets collapsing as labor shortages and fear slashed production and demand, shrinking economies by up to 30% in some regions. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some merchants buried their coins under floorboards, thinking the plague would pass and they'd cash in later. Spoiler, most didn't live to dig them up. Historians still argue whether the economic crash sparked innovation, like new trade routes, or just entrenched poverty for decades. You're not sure, but you're too hungry to care about long-term trends. You pause by a stall where a grizzled man offers a single turnip for a silver ring. You'd laugh, but you remember that survivor's guilt, remember the ghosts. Hunger's a new kind of haunt. The vendor's eyes are hard, like he's seen too many sob stories. You offer a chipped knife instead, no deal. A woman nearby trades a shawl for a half-rotten apple, her hands shaking. You feel her desperation. Your own sack's been empty since that turnip find. Remember the muddy field? The square's a shadow of the market you saw weeks ago, its energy drained like a bled-out patient. A cart creaks by, its driver bartering old boots for a sack of flour. No coins, just swaps. Money's losing its shine. You spot a kid slipping an onion from a stall and the vendor doesn't even chase him. Too tired, maybe, or just numb. You joke about the kid starting a black market, but theft's no game when everyone's starving. A man mutters about dead ports and ships rotting at docks. You remember those trade routes? Remember the coughing merchant? They're silent now, choked by fear and death. The church bell tolls, a hollow sound, and you move on, dodging a pile of broken crates. The economy's a corpse, and you're scavenging its bones, hoping for a scrap to keep you going. Every empty stall screams the same truth. The plague's not just killing people, it's killing the world you knew. You keep walking, your steps heavy, praying for a deal before your strength runs dry. You're skulking through a tense village, the air crackling with shouts and the distant thud of fists on wood. It's 1347, and the Black Death's fear-soaked grip is sparking rebellions across Europe. You weave past a crowd gathered around a toppled cart, its grain spilled like blood in the mud. Angry voices rise, peasants, artisans, even a stray merchant, cursing lords and taxes while the plague laughs at their defiance. You're just trying to slip through without catching a stray elbow or worse, but the rage is contagious, and you feel it simmering in your own chest. The mainstream fact? The plague's chaos fueled uprisings, like the Jacquerie in France by 1358, as survivors lashed out against elites who failed to protect them. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some rebels smeared their faces with ash to look ghostly, hoping to scare nobles into submission. Spoiler, it just made them sneeze. Historians still argue whether these revolts were driven more by hunger or distrust in failing systems. You're not sure, but the mob's torchlight says desperation's winning tonight. You duck behind a barrel as a man hurls a stone at a manor's gate. It clangs, and the crowd roars. You remember that empty market. Remember the turnip trade? No wonder they're rioting. Starvation's a great recruiter. A woman screams, "They hoard while we die," and you can't argue. The manor's walls loom, candles flickering inside like the rich are mocking the mob. A kid, barely a teen, waves a pitchfork, eyes wild. Kid, you're brave, but this could end badly. The crowd surges, and you're pushed toward a burning effigy, someone's idea of a lord, probably. You smell singed straw and sweat. You joke about their arts and crafts skills, but the flames are too close. A guard appears, sword drawn, yelling, "Disperse!" Fat chance. A bottle sails over your head, shattering against the manor. You remember those flagellants. Remember their bloody chants. Same energy, different target. The rebellion's a fever, and you're caught in the heat. You slip down an alley, heart pounding, as the mob's shouts grow louder. A man's pleading, maybe a tax collector caught out. You don't look back. The plague's broken something deeper than bodies. It's shattered trust, and now the living are fighting over the scraps. You clutch your cloak, dodging a stray dog that's smarter than you for running. The village glows with torchlight, but it's not hope. It's chaos. You keep moving, praying the rebels don't turn on strangers like you. You're crouched in the dim corner of a scribe's workshop, the air thick with the musty scent of ink and parchment. It's 1347, and Europe's scholars are scrambling to record the Black Death's chaos, their quills scratching out tales of despair and defiance. You watch a gaunt scribe, his fingers stained black, scribbling furiously by candlelight, as if words could outrun the plague. Shelves sag with manuscripts, chronicles, prayers, half-finished pleas to posterity, but they're powerless against the death piling up outside. You're just passing through, seeking shelter, but the weight of their futile effort presses on you like damp stone. The mainstream fact? Chroniclers like Giovanni Villani in Florence documented the plague's devastation in 1348, providing vivid accounts that shape our understanding today. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes hid curses in their texts, hexing anyone who stole their work. Plague or no plague, they were petty. Spoiler, the curses didn't stop looters. Historians still argue whether these records were accurate or skewed by fear and superstition. You're not sure, but the scribe's haunted eyes suggest he's writing from a dark place. You shift, avoiding a stack of parchment that looks one sneeze from collapsing. The scribe mutters about God's wrath, his pen trembling. You remember that rebel mob? Remember the burning effigy? He's probably heard their shouts too. A page slips to the floor, inked with a sketch of a corpse cart. Cheerful decor. You'd ask what he's writing, but he looks like he hasn't slept since spring. A candle sputters, casting shadows that dance like the mural skeletons. Remember the dance macabre? Art and words, all grasping at the same truth. Death's winning. A knock at the door makes you jump. Another scribe, younger, stumbles in, clutching a scroll. More dead in Siena, he gasps. The older one just nods, like it's old news. You catch a line on his page. None spared, neither young nor old. You joke about his optimism, but the ink's still wet, and so's your dread. The workshop's a tomb for thoughts, every word a gravestone for a world slipping away. You wonder if anyone will read this, or if it'll just rot like those fields. Remember the dead sheep? The scribe glances at you, suspicious, like you're here to steal his quill. Relax, buddy. I'm just hiding from the chaos. You slip out, the night air sharp against your skin. The manuscripts stay behind, their words heavy but useless against the plague's march. You keep moving, the scribe scratching echoing in your head, a reminder that even knowledge can't save you now. You're trudging through a windswept village, the sky heavy with bruise-colored clouds that spit icy rain. It's 1347, and Europe's weather is turning as cruel as the Black Death, with storms and cold snaps piling misery on an already battered land. You pull your threadbare cloak tighter, your boots sinking into mud that feels like it's trying to swallow you whole. Fields are flooded, crops drowned, and the hunger you've been dodging is sharper now, gnawing at your ribs. The plague's bad enough, but nature's kicking you while you're down, making survival feel like a cruel jest. The mainstream fact? Harsh weather in the late 1340s, including heavy rains and early frosts, ruined harvests across Europe, worsening famine and weakening plague survivors. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villagers blamed angry spirits for the storms, burning sage to calm the skies. Spoiler, the clouds didn't care. Historians still argue whether the weather's impact was a mere footnote or a major amplifier of the plague's toll. You're not sure, but the rain stinging your face feels personal. You slog past a collapsed barn, its timbers jutting like broken bones. You remember that scribe's workshop? Remember the corpse cart sketch? He'd probably blame this on divine wrath, too. A farmer, soaked and cursing, tries to salvage a sack of sodden grain. Good luck, pal. Looks like soup now. Your stomach growls, louder than the thunder. That turnip from the field, remember the muddy find, is a distant memory, and you're scanning for anything edible. A half-rotten cabbage lies in a ditch. Tempting, but you've got standards. Barely. Lightning cracks, and you flinch, ducking under a sagging awning. A woman hurries by, her basket empty, muttering about cursed skies. You joke about needing an ark, but the flood's too real. The village's river is swollen, lapping at doorsteps, and you hear shouts about a breached mill. Great, more bad news. You spot a kid fishing in a puddle, optimistic, but he's not catching dinner. The rain's relentless, washing away hope as fast as topsoil. You remember that empty market? Remember the apple trade? This weather's why. Fields can't grow and markets can't sell. You move on, the wind howling like it's mocking you. Every step's a fight, and the cold's seeping into your bones, making you wonder if hunger or fever will get you first. The plague's invisible, but this storm's a fist, and it's hitting hard. You keep walking, eyes squinting through the downpour, praying for shelter before the skies claim you too. You're tucked in a drafty shed, the rain hammering the leaky roof like it's trying to break in. It's 1347, and Europe's herbalists are your last hope against the Black Death, their bundles of sage and thyme offering faint glimmers of survival. You clutch a sprig of rosemary an old woman swore would guard your breath, its sharp scent cutting through the damp. Herbal lores everywhere, teas, poultices, even charms, but most are guesses, and you're betting on slim odds. The sheds crammed with drying herbs, their shadows dancing in the flicker of a single candle. You're not here for miracles, just something to tip the scales. The mainstream fact? Herbal remedies, like willow bark or mint, were widely used during the plague, with some easing symptoms despite no cure for Yersinia pestis. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some herbalists tied garlic around their necks, thinking its stink repelled fleas. Spoiler, it just repelled friends. Historians still argue whether herbal knowledge saved lives or gave false hope that delayed real progress. You're not sure, but the rosemary's calming, even if it's just in your head. You shift on a creaky bench, dodging a drip from the ceiling. The herbalist, a wiry woman with hands like roots, grinds lavender in a mortar, muttering about balancing humors. You remember that stormy village? Remember the flooded mill? Her shed's a dry haven, but the plague's still out there. She hands you a cloth sachet, mint and elderflower, she says, for fever. You tuck it in your cloak, next to that empty sack. Remember the turnip trade? It's not much, but it's something. Her eyes are kind, but tired, like she knows the odds. A cough from the village makes you tense. The herbalist doesn't flinch, just keeps grinding. Boil this with water, she says, passing you a pinch of dried yarrow. You nod, though you've got no pot. You'd ask for more, but a man bursts in, begging for plague tea for his son. She turns, and you slip out, not wanting to drain her stock. You joke about starting an herb garden, but you're no farmer and the ground's too wet anyway. The rains ease to a drizzle, and you step into the mud, rosemary still in hand. You remember that useless toad venom, remember the tavern. This feels different, grounded, not snake oil. The herbalist's words linger. Keep strong and luck might hold. You're trying, but strength's scarce. The plague's a storm, but these herbs are a fragile umbrella. You keep moving, the village fading behind you, hoping this sprig's enough to carry you through. You're standing on a windswept hill, the dawn painting the horizon in soft pinks and golds, a stark contrast to the ravaged Europe below. It's 1347, and the Black Death has scarred the land, but you're glimpsing the faint stirrings of a new era. You clutch that rosemary sprig. Remember the herbalist's sachet? Its scent grounding you as you survey a valley where survivors rebuild, timber by timber, hope by hope. The plague's not gone, but its grip is loosening, and the world's shifting under your feet. Labor shortages are giving peasants bargaining power, old hierarchies are wobbling, and new ideas are sprouting like weeds in a ruined field. You're alive, and that's a start, but the future's as uncertain as the path ahead. The mainstream fact? The Black Death, by 1351, reshaped Europe, sparking economic and social changes like the rise of wage labor and weakened feudalism, setting the stage for the Renaissance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some survivors celebrated with plague feasts, gorging on hoarded food to thumb their noses at death. Spoiler, indigestion wasn't the best victory lap. Historians still argue whether the plague birthed progress or just exposed cracks in a brittle system. You're not sure, but the valley's bustle, new walls, fresh fields, feels like a quiet rebellion against despair. You step forward, boots crunching on frost-kissed grass. A cart rumbles below, piled with lumber, not bodies. You remember that overflowing graveyard, remember the mass pits? It's still there, but new graves are fewer now. A woman plants seeds in a cleared patch, her hands steady. You nod to her, and she nods back. Survivor's code, no words needed. The air's crisp, cleaner than the filthy streets. Remember the sewage puddles. You breathe deep, rosemary mingling with earth, and feel a flicker of something like hope. A man hammers nails into a half-built house, his kid handing him tools. You'd joke about their construction skills, but the sight's too earnest. You remember those rebels, remember the ash-smeared faces. Their anger's fading into work, building something new. The church bell rings, not for death, but for morning prayer, and it sounds lighter, like it's remembering how to hope. Your guilt lingers, remember the ghosts? But it's softer now, drowned by the clatter of life restarting. The hill slopes toward the valley, and you start down, the rosemary tucked in your cloak. The plague's scars are deep, empty homes, silent markets, but they're not the whole story. You're part of what's next, whatever that is. The dawn's warm, the path's open, and you keep walking, ready to meet it. The world below grows quieter now, the valley's hum fading into a gentle rustle of leaves. You're easing into a softer rhythm, your steps slow, your breath steady. The rosemary's scent lingers, a whisper of resilience, wrapping you in calm. The plague's shadow stretches long, but it's thinning, dissolving into the morning mist. You're safe here, on this hill, where the air's clean and the light's kind. Let the valley's builders carry on. Your journey's done for now. Picture a soft bed, a warm blanket, the world holding its breath so you can rest. Drift gently. Let the dawn's glow cradle you, and slip into dreams where fear can't follow. Sleep now, sweet listener, wrapped in peace. Sweet dreams.